Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspiring show coming right up with special guest Vanessa Hua, and she's here today to share with us her new book, A River of Stars. Now, Vanessa is a writer for the San Francisco Chronicle and the author of a short story collection, Deceit and Other Possibilities. She's received countless awards for her writings, as well as honors from the Society of Professional Journalists and the Asian American Journalists Association. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, the Atlantic, FRONTLINE, World, the Washington Post, and everywhere else. She writes a weekly column for the San Francisco Chronicle, and I'm so delighted to be introducing Vanessa Hua.
Thanks for having me on.
What a joy it is to have you here. My goodness, you're such a prolific writer, and people can see your works everywhere, and it's so exciting now to have a book that we can talk about, too.
Yes, I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Well, and so why don't we start, before we get into the book too much, why don't we start about your inspiration as a writer? You know, what inspired you to become a writer in the first place? Let's start there.
Sure. I've been writing ever since I was a kid, for as long as I can remember. I still have notebooks where I wrote a story and also, put in a title page and illustrated it just like the kinds of books that I would find in the library. And I have a distinct memory in the second grade. We had to write short stories, and the teacher had everyone vote by raising their hand on their favorite, and mine won. But before I could savor that victory, I overheard my classmate lean over and say, I only voted for hers because it was the longest. So that was my first experience with publicly, putting forth my work, and also my first snarky review. But I think for me, my inspirations come from my curiosity and, following that wherever it takes me, whether that's in journalism or in fiction. And I think it also has something to do with the fact that I'm the American-born daughter of Chinese immigrants. So I've always had a sense of being both an insider and outsider, and, having those kind of dual points of view, I think have been really helpful for me in terms of just wanting so much to try and understand lives different than mine, and doing that by being a big reader, but also by writing.
Well, it seems that you are the perfect person to write this book with the unique perspective that you have, because your curiosity takes you into so many different arenas. But when we talk about, when we get into this book and talk about the maternity tourism of China and just some of these other countries that are doing that, I think it's really something that most people don't even realize that's happening, but why people are doing it as well. I mean, there's a reason that people are, in some ways, maybe feel forced to do these things.
Yes, definitely. And just to tell you a story, I got the inspiration for this novel when I was pregnant with my own twins and living in Southern California. And I began hearing about these maternity centers that, house women before giving birth so that their kids will get U.S. citizenship. But the neighbors were baffled. These are suburban homes that, where all these pregnant women are coming and going, and it sounded like a brothel in reverse. But I was drawn into into their stories, wondering what could drive someone to, at the most vulnerable time in their life, to be so far from friends and family. And it made me think a lot about what American citizenship might mean for their children, even though, it was not, they tended to go back to their homeland immediately afterwards. But there was something about U.S. citizenship that was and remains sort of prestigious and a gold standard, no matter how much of our country's reputation is taking a beating right now, domestically and abroad.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, it's very interesting. And when we look at what, my great-grandparents were immigrants from Portugal, and I hear stories about them coming over and immigrating to Hawaii. When we talk about people looking for that better life, a lot of times it's kind of, people kind of forget the journeys that are taken and the risks that are taken for people that do that. And I really appreciate in your book, you outline that. I mean, it is a scary time if you're pregnant and in a foreign country and you're doing what you think is best for your child.
Yeah, definitely. And I think right now what we see in a lot of the coverage is stereotypes and statistics, unfortunately, and we just don't necessarily see portrayals of the real individuals and human lives, behind this migration. And I think when you deny someone their story, you deny them their humanity. And so that's why I think, whether it's in journalism or in fiction, any opportunity in which we might begin to explore the lives of others and make that imaginative leap of empathy, that will help sort of foster a greater understanding of the situation our country finds itself in now.
So when we talk about China's one-child policy, how is that interwoven in all of this?
Yeah, it's throughout my novel. And I think maybe it'll be helpful if I explain what the one-child policy is, just for your listeners. So it was founded by China in 1979 in an effort to curb population growth because they thought it would hamper their economic development. But there were some unforeseen consequences. For example, because China has a traditional preference for boys, and if families, were told you could only have one child, let's say a family gave birth to a daughter that then ended up, some of these girls ended up being placed up for adoption internationally, as we see, have seen in the U.S., like Chinese girl adoptees. In my novel, Scarlett, the main character, her mother works at a maternity clinic or one of these family planning clinics. And so as a child, Scarlett witnesses some of what happens, to enforce the policy. Sometimes there were forced abortions, forced sterilizations, really horrific stuff. And so the country decided to relax the rules in 2015, and then just recently has done away with it altogether because they're realizing as the country gets economically developed that the birth rate was going down anyway. And in fact, now they're worried about a demographic time bomb with this aging population and, not enough young people sort of paying into the system. And so this is sort of the backdrop for my novel. Scarlett is in some ways coming here as part of exercising her reproductive freedoms and just sort of like navigating that and, sort of how her views have been shaped and what she's seeking for her own child.
Well, and interesting. So when you're dealing with, like in China's the obviously the backdrop and a perfect example too, but we're dealing with other countries and they have these kind of mandates in place, just some of the unforeseen, as you're talking about, consequences that end up happening, but then the choices that women are making for themselves. So it makes sense that one would immigrate to another country. Right.
Or there were, even if a family is choosing not to, there were some instances, if they had the means, they might do IVF in another country, right? So they could get two kids in one birth. Or even these maternity centers, in some ways, are related in the U.S. in that we have a generation of families trying to figure out some way in which they can, build the families they want and have a life for their children that they want. And so that might make them sort of more open to the idea of leaving home during pregnancy and coming here.
Well, and I'd love for you to just kind of go over that one more time, because when we talk about maternity centers and maternity tourism, I think a lot of people may have a hard time wrapping their head around that and what that looks like. Because really, there's this whole marketing and this whole market for pregnant women to come to the U.S. and have their baby here, so they will have that passport that we were talking about.
Right. And I mean, it's not just Chinese. I've read news stories about wealthy Russians who will do it in Miami, for example, or even do it on a ad hoc basis, just come here and rent a place. I do want to preface it that, I mean, it's very organized. I've been to websites where you can, click what kind of room you want, standard, luxury, and they boast like different amenities. So it's out there. But at the same time, I do want to preface it or, caution against trying to anyone who might be thinking, oh, should we change the 14th Amendment because of this? I mean, this is a really fascinating phenomena, but what's unusual is what makes for great fiction. It shouldn't determine a country's entire immigration policy.
Of course, and thank you for clarifying that as well. I mean, while the backdrop of this is, China, and that's what we're discussing, that's not the only country that this is happening with, nor should policies be made on a novel. So
right.
I appreciate you sharing that because, I mean, I think it's a lot of times people are just going, gosh, that's just a house with a lot of pregnant women going in and out all the time,
Right. Well, I will say I had read a news story that really had got me thinking about what it must be like for these women. In one of the news stories, a neighbor said a pregnant Chinese woman showed up, knocked on the door, begging for food. And so he took her to McDonald's. And then brought her back, and then she went back into the house. And I thought, it's pregnancy, it's hard physically. You're changing so much, but it should be a joyous time. You shouldn't feel like a prisoner. And so it just made me think very deeply about what it must be like for these women. And so some of what the challenges they might face, what kind of clashes might go on between a bunch of pregnant women living together in this very stressful time.
I could not even imagine. I think I would lose my mind if it was me. But I mean, it's tough enough as it is. So I just couldn't even imagine, going through all the additional difficulties to, just try to do the best you can to ensure your child has a better life. And wow, it's just, it really just, it leaves me speechless sometimes on just the extent people will go through to do whatever it takes for their children,
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, we see that in the news right now with, immigrants from, Latin America and Mexico and just sort of like what's, I think there's a quote out there, like you don't come here unless your house is on fire, metaphorically, right? You don't risk everything unless, what you're leaving is even, even greater harm could come to you.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have been a country of hope, and I hope we remain that way. I know in your, you also talk about the controversy of anchor babies and just the immigration policy. We've kind of been over that a little bit. Is there anything that you'd like to add to that?
Sure. I mean, I think, since 1965, there's been this policy of family reunification. Right now, rhetoric is sort of being tossed about calling it chain migration as if it's something negative. But again, I don't think it should be abolished. I think it's really important that there is, the best and brightest are willing to come to America. The hardest workers of the world are willing to come to America. And, part of that is because there is that hope that they can be reunited with family potentially someday. And so, I mean, take even my parents. They were graduate students in engineering and science in the 1960s, and they ended up sponsoring their brothers and sisters, and their children have gone on, to get degrees and, be American-born citizens. And my grandmother, they sponsored. She didn't have a college degree. She wasn't working, and again, there's policies out there that would say, oh, she doesn't belong. But yet she helped raise us. She lived with us, and helped my parents, put down roots and build their life and pursue the American dream. And so we should it's very important to really think about we're just at a vital point right now, and to really think about what it means to be American and how immigration has done so much to make us the country that we are. And I think my novel, in kind of showing those sacrifices and the determination and sort of their struggles, I do hope it kind of shows how there's a vitality that immigration brings. That, economists say it's a net benefit to the economy. And even walking through Chinatown, which is where much of the novel is set, you sense, you feel it, you smell it, that vitality, that striving. And so that's something that's always inspired me, growing up and professionally as a journalist and as an author.
I love going through Chinatown in San Francisco. It's, I think, just such an experience for the senses. And a lot of times people don't even realize what amazing culture just is held within a small area.
Yeah, and I completely agree. And, tourists will go to the ground level shops and restaurants, but if you just look up, you'll see like clothes hanging in the window to dry, and people live there. So it's just like a thriving, it's a thriving place where there's so many, people have so many interesting histories and stories that can be told.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just the dragging gates and taking pictures, and there's so much more there.
It's home, right? It's home for people.
Yeah, it's a place to be. And so, what do you think are some of the unique challenges or the unique perils that Asian Americans in our culture are experiencing, and maybe particularly in the San Francisco area?
I think Chinese Americans in particular, let's say, the country's first anti-immigration law was against Chinese. There was something called the Chinese Exclusion Act that went on from 1882 into the 1934 until the U.S. became an ally with China during World War II, and that really caused a lot of stress and secrets within the Chinese community. And even today, even though Chinese have been a part of the fabric of this country for generations, we still get perceived as perpetual foreigners. People will say, "Where are you from? Where are you really from?" Or if someone is angry at you for being standing in line in the place they think they deserve, they'll say, "Go back to your own country." Like, we're never seen as fully American. But I am hopeful at the same time because of things like the Crazy Rich Asians novel, which was adapted for screen, is opening now, and there's there's several books being adapted for streaming television series on Netflix and on Apple TV, and my novel, among other Asian American novels that have come out this summer, just give me hope that there is hope for broader representation within popular culture.
I would agree with you. I think that this is actually one of the perfect times in history where we're seeing more inclusion, even though it sometimes seems like it's pretty chaotic at the same time. But there seems to be more of an outcry for inclusion along, many different groups. If we're talking in regards to women or people of different ethnicity or education, what have you, it seems that it's all coming together right now.
Yes, I definitely agree. It can be our moment. Yeah.
I think and your book helps people to seize it and understand kind of like a culture maybe they're not really familiar with. I know, it was a long time ago. Lisa Ling did a series on the maternity tourism and talked about that. And your book outlines so beautifully what it's like, and it not only is just kind of a outline of what it's like for women that are going through these type of situations, but you have humor and wit, and you become involved with the characters. You love the characters. I mean, Scarlett's like, you want to see what's going on with Scarlett and what adventure she's going to go on next. You've done such a beautiful job writing this book.
Thank you so much. I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, I'm sure you're getting, well, I know you've been getting such rave reviews on this. What other things would you like to share with our listeners in regards to this book? Typically, we don't go over it too much because it is a novel. A River of Stars is something we want our listeners to go and pick up and read. But what would you like to share with our listeners?
It's also, for me, it's a novel about motherhood, and I think that's sort of been sort of its broader appeal. I've found with readers that this was when I was pregnant, or even before I became a mom, I worried that I wouldn't have enough time to write anymore. What would happen to my identity? But what I found is true. I have less time than ever before. But having kids has really opened my eyes and my heart to the world again. Just sort of the wonder of the world, and also, it makes me reflect on how I was raised and what that meant, what it was like for my mother, and or even just how you pass down ideas to them about social justice or about the world that we want to live in. I think it has made me a better writer.
Well, and what a common thread that most people can identify with when we talk about motherhood, and it's something that women across the nation can read and go, gosh, you know what, I couldn't even imagine if something like this was happening to me, but what if,
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I think there's something, I've had readers of my column write me and say, I'm not a woman, I'm not a mother, I'm not Chinese, but I could, I'm there with you. I can relate to what you're saying. And, it's, for me, it's so important about exploring and connecting people.
When you were writing your book, did you have an outline for what Scarlett was going to go through, or is it something that kind of wrote itself?
I think for me it was the premise. I began with the premise, this idea of a woman trying to escape from a maternity center and, what drove her to that moment. And I think from there, once you have a premise, that's how you begin to develop a character, because, what that character wants most in life and how they behave and what they're willing to do is a reflection of who they are.
Mm-hmm. And how that all came together. Well, and so, Vanessa, where can our listeners connect with you and learn more, not just about this book, but the other writings that you do?
Sure. You can go to my website at www.vanessahua.com, and my last name is spelled Hua. So that's www.vanessahua.com.
Well, Vanessa, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Vanessa. It's been such a pleasure to spend this time with you, and of course to talk about your new book, A River of Stars. You can pick up a copy of A River of Stars at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie bookstores. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Thursday, Friday, and Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.